Meadowrun was the kind of place where mornings rose with mist and silence, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle or the flutter of wings by the river. I'd come here to escape, to rebuild, maybe to forget, but I never expected Nell. She arrived in the back of Tilda's truck, curled up like she was trying to disappear, blind, deaf, unmoving, and yet not alone. Right beside her sat a duck, Penny, stubbornly refusing to leave her side. In that moment, I felt something shift. I didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of something none of us could explain. The air smelled like wet hay and distant wood smoke the morning we unloaded Nell. Her body was limp in my arms, lighter than I expected for a shepherd her size. No fight, no fear, just resignation. Penny hopped anxiously beside me, quacking low and rhythmic like she was trying to talk Nell through it. I'd seen some strange animal bonds before, but this was different. Tilda didn't say much, just handed me a worn blanket and told me to settle Nell in the side barn where the others couldn't spook her. Dusty, the old mutt with a stare like he'd seen the worst of humanity, growled low from his pen. Maple pressed herself into a corner, eyes wide. These dogs were already fractured, and now we were dropping a blind, deaf pup and a duck into the mix. It felt like chaos waiting to happen. Still, I laid Nell down gently on the straw, keeping Penny close. She wouldn't leave anyway, not even for food. I remember thinking, what kind of bond is this? Was the duck mothering her? Protecting her? I didn't know. That night, as I sat outside the barn listening to the rain, I heard it. A gentle rustle, then the softest little bump against the wall. I peeked through a crack in the boards. Penny had climbed onto Nell's back. They were asleep like that, still, breathing in sync. And in that stillness, I felt the first flicker of hope. The first days were unpredictable, stretched thin between fragile silence and sudden bursts of tension. The barn had turned into a strange sanctuary, divided by unspoken lines of fear, curiosity, and survival. Nell remained mostly still, her milky eyes flickering now and then with something that almost resembled awareness, though she rarely moved unless Penny moved first. That duck, absurd as it felt to say out loud, had become her anchor in a world that gave her nothing to see or hear. Penny guided her with gentle nudges, her beak brushing against Nell's shoulder or neck in quiet prompts, steering her around hay bales, into warmth, toward food. It was like watching instinct and intuition dance without words. The other dogs weren't sure what to make of it. Dusty, ever the bruised old soldier, kept his distance but watched with a seriousness I couldn't ignore. There was no aggression, but his body was taut, like he was weighing every interaction. Maple had begun inching closer, her fear giving way to a hesitant curiosity, drawn to the calm Nell radiated in Penny's presence. And then there was Noah, young, quick to act before he thinks, already arguing that Nell should be moved to a permanent facility where real specialists could help her. Tilda disagreed, quietly but firmly, insisting that what Nell needed wasn't clinical, it was connection. That simple word stuck with me. None of us knew what we were doing, but the duck did. And Nell, she was beginning to respond. It was just after sunrise when I found the blood. A few smears across the barn's wooden floorboards near the feed crates. Not much, but enough to freeze me in place. My first instinct was to check on the dogs, but Dusty was pacing in his pen, tense but uninjured, and Maple was curled up tight, trembling slightly but unharmed. My heart dropped as I turned toward Nell's stall. She was there, still lying in her usual corner, but her side heaved in uneven breaths, and Penny, for the first time, was nowhere to be seen. I crouched beside Nell, brushing my hand over her coat and feeling the tacky residue of dried blood around her neck. It wasn't a deep wound, more like a gash from something sharp, but she had no way of crying out, no voice or sound to alert us. I cleaned it carefully, my hands shaking not just from panic, but from something colder, the realization that someone or something had been in that barn during the night. Tilda arrived minutes later, her expression unreadable as I pointed out the trail. Fox, she guessed at first, but her voice lacked conviction. Or something else, something that didn't come for the food, just her. Penny reappeared later that afternoon, soaked, shivering, and with one of her wings slightly askew. She stayed close to Nell that evening, refusing to sleep. We all sat in that barn for hours, saying nothing, listening to a silence that suddenly felt hunted. We didn't sleep that night, any of us. The barn became a kind of watchtower, each of us guarding a silence that felt too fragile to name. Tilda paced more than usual, her boots scraping softly across the floor, muttering to herself about tightening the locks and rigging old floodlights along the fence. Noah, on the other hand, couldn't sit still. He kept pressing the same question, again and again. Why are we doing this here? Why not call someone who knows what they're doing? Until finally Tilda snapped at him, her voice low but cutting, telling him that maybe knowing wasn't the most important thing right now. I didn't say anything. I just stayed beside Nell and Penny, watching the way the dog seemed to lean into the duck's small frame, like she was holding on to something no one else could give her. The gash on her neck had stopped bleeding, but she'd grown tense, her breathing shallow and cautious. Even Maple seemed affected, curling up closer than she ever had before, as if she too sensed that the walls of the barn didn't feel as safe as they had yesterday. Dusty was the wild card. He stood most of the night, his body rigid, eyes fixed on the barn door like he was waiting for something to return, or daring it to. No barking, no growling, just readiness. That night changed something in all of us. The barn wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a line we were standing on, together. The following morning brought more than just fog and birdsong. A white truck pulled into the gravel drive, kicking up dust and drawing everyone's eyes toward the road. It wasn't someone we recognized. A tall man in a canvas coat stepped out, said he was from the Alverian Agricultural Oversight Office, claimed he'd heard about an unauthorized shelter operation and had received an anonymous complaint about animals being kept in unsanitary conditions. We exchanged quick glances, already guessing who'd made the call. Noah avoided our eyes. The man poked around the barn with a clipboard and practiced indifference, his gaze flitting across our makeshift bedding, the medical supplies tucked in old cabinets, the hay stacked for warmth. His eyes lingered the longest on Nell, curled beside Penny, still healing, blinking into the void, and then on Penny herself. "Is that duck a pet or a resource?" he asked without humor. I didn't answer. Tilda stepped in before I could, explaining that the animals here were rescues, temporary, that we were following every welfare guideline we could manage. But his eyes didn't soften. He scribbled something and told us he'd be back in a week for an official review. That night the wind picked up and carried strange howls through the trees. We doubled the locks on the barn doors. Maple barely ate. Dusty stopped sleeping. Penny began pacing in small, tight circles around Nell, beak trembling as if anticipating something none of us could name. And in the shadows outside, the safety we'd built began to feel paper thin. I didn't expect to care this much. I told myself, when I came to Meadowrun, that this would be temporary, a pause, not a place to grow roots. But now I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the warped ceiling beams above the cot, wondering how I'd ever let Nell go. She'd never seen my face, never heard my voice, but somehow, through some quiet current that ran deeper than words, she trusted me. Or maybe she trusted Penny, and I was just part of that gravity. Tilda had already said it out loud. She's not going to make it out there. But was keeping her here fair? She was vulnerable, not just because she was blind and deaf, but because she belonged to a kind of stillness that the world outside would crush without hesitation. And Penny, if we gave Nell up, what would happen to her? Noah wanted a plan. He talked about programs, transport routes, sanctuary systems, but I'd stopped thinking in terms of logistics. What haunted me now was the question I couldn't answer. Do we save them for them or for us? And what if the lines between those two things were already too blurred to separate? The fog didn't lift that morning. It hung low across the pastures like something alive, coiling around fence posts and swallowing the distant hills. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, though I saw no eyes in the brush, no footprints in the soil, just silence. Too much silence. When I opened the barn that day, something was wrong. Nell was alone. The straw in her corner was disturbed, scattered in frantic arcs, and Penny was gone. Not just wandering, gone. We searched the fields for hours, Tilda and I, calling even though we knew a duck wouldn't answer and Nell couldn't hear us anyway. Maple paced restlessly, whining low, while Dusty barked at shadows near the tree line. That evening, as the wind turned sharp and the clouds sagged heavy with rain, I found something by the far creek bed. A trail of disturbed grass, a feather caught in a thorn bush, and a single webbed footprint leading toward the woods. I didn't tell Noah. I didn't want another argument, another spreadsheet of options. This wasn't about rescue anymore. This was something else, something older and stranger than any protocol could cover. When I returned to the barn, Nell was upright, facing the door. Not moving, not trembling, just waiting. Her body still, but her whole being pointed outward like she knew something I didn't. And deep inside I started to wonder, was this just a coincidence of survival, or something I'd been too blind to see? The days blurred after Penny disappeared. I marked time by Nell's breathing, by the way Maple crept closer at night, curling near her with the careful reverence of someone approaching a sacred flame. Dusty stayed vigilant, never resting for more than a few minutes, his eyes constantly tracking the barn doors, the treetops beyond, the windows that let in slivers of dark. It was as if the absence of that little duck had unbalanced all of us. Tilda began spending more time in the barn, sitting cross-legged in the corner, her hands folded over her knees, just watching. She didn't speak often, not to me, not to the dogs, but I could feel her shifting. Something in her eyes softened when Nell turned her head just slightly in response to Maple's approach. It was the tiniest movement, but it meant everything. For Nell, connection didn't come through sound or sight. It came through presence, through warmth, through rhythm. One night, I fell asleep with my hand resting on her back, and I woke to find her pressed closer to me, her breath steady beneath my palm. That was the night I stopped thinking of her as a project. She wasn't something broken I was fixing. She was teaching me how to see. Noah started showing up less. His frustration grew louder even when he wasn't speaking. He believed we were wasting time, holding on to a storybook version of rescue. Maybe he was right. But when I looked into Nell's eyes, those soft, pale mirrors of the unknown, I couldn't imagine walking away. And then, 5 days after Penny vanished, a sound broke the dusk, a single high-pitched quack echoing from beyond the tree line. I didn't breathe. None of us did. Nell lifted her head, and for the first time she moved. On her own. Nell took 3 trembling steps toward the barn door before she collapsed. Not from pain, not entirely, but from confusion, maybe exhaustion. But something had pulled her forward. That single sound had sliced through her darkness like lightning through a forest, and in that moment, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding. Penny wasn't just a companion. She was Nell's compass. Without her, the world stopped making sense. That night brought our first real argument. Noah stormed into the barn, saw Nell curled on the straw and me beside her with the lantern still lit, and he exploded. "You're letting a disabled dog chase a duck through the woods like some kind of fairy tale," he snapped. "This isn't rescue anymore. This is obsession." Tilda didn't yell, but her voice had steel in it when she answered. Maybe obsession's exactly what she needs. Maybe it's the only thing any of us have left. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It rang in my bones, because deep down I was torn. I knew Noah wasn't entirely wrong. We were holding on too tightly, refusing to let reality shape our decisions. But I also knew something had awakened in Nell the moment that quack echoed through the trees. A tether had pulled taut, and now we were either going to follow it or let it snap. Later I sat outside the barn, eyes on the tree line. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe a sign, maybe the duck, maybe the courage to choose between protecting Nell or trusting her to lead. The following day, the air was thick with decisions no one wanted to name. The barn had turned into a waiting room for something we couldn't predict. I caught Tilda watching the woods with her arms crossed, jaw set like a woman preparing for a storm she didn't believe she could stop. Noah avoided me, working outside near the fences, slamming tools louder than needed, saying nothing. The line between care and control was fraying fast. That afternoon, I walked Nell along the fence line. I didn't lead her, not really. I just held the end of a soft cloth harness, letting her feel the rhythm of my steps through the rope. She moved slowly, hesitantly, her nose low, her ears doing nothing. But when we passed the northeast gate, the one closest to the creek bed, her head lifted, her nose twitched, her pace changed. She knew, and I did too. That's when the question hit me hardest. If we opened the gate and she left, what then? Would she find Penny? Would she survive? And what would I become without her? That evening, we gathered in the barn. Tilda said little. Noah crossed his arms, refusing to agree with what we all knew was coming. "She's not a wild animal," he muttered. "She's not going to make it out there." But I wasn't sure making it meant what he thought it did. Maybe Nell didn't need a fenced-in future. Maybe she needed a path. And maybe, for the first time, my job wasn't to stop her. It was to walk behind her until she didn't need me anymore. And so we stood there, staring at the barn doors. The moment was close. We just hadn't decided yet which of us would open them. The barn felt smaller that night, like the walls had pulled in around us. We kept the lamps low, and the dogs were quiet, even Dusty, who normally paced like a soldier at dusk. Nell sat by the main door, her body still, her nose tilted toward the wind slipping in through the cracks. Maple lay close, touching her shoulder gently, almost like she didn't want her to go, or maybe she was saying goodbye. I sat beside them, hand resting near Nell's paw, not touching, just present. The decision hadn't been made, not out loud. No one had said, "Let's open the gate." But we all knew that's where this was heading. Tilda leaned against the beam, arms crossed, her eyes shining in the lantern light. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence had always carried more weight than Noah's words. And Noah, he wasn't there. He'd left earlier, his frustration and fear boiling over into quiet retreat. I didn't blame him. This wasn't a clean rescue. This wasn't about saving something and putting it back in the world better than we found it. It was murkier, more human. We weren't fixing Nell. We were being changed by her. Outside, the fog was lifting, and just beyond the hill, from the direction of the creek bed, came that sound again, a soft, distant quack. Nell stood. No command, no tug, just instinct. A tremble passed through her frame, and then she stepped forward toward the door. I rose, heart pounding. Behind me, Tilda whispered, "It's time." And for a long, breathless second, we stood at the threshold, not just of the barn, but of the choice, the one that couldn't be undone. The gate was waiting, and this time, Nell would lead. I didn't open the gate for her. She did it herself. It wasn't locked, it never really had been, just latched with a loose hook, enough to keep the wind from swinging it wide. But Nell, with her blind eyes and silent world, walked straight to it, nose lifted to the breeze like it carried a map only she could read. And with one small nudge, she slipped through. She didn't rush. There was no drama, no triumphant music playing in the background. Just slow, deliberate steps across the moonlit pasture, her head held high like she was following something ancient and invisible. Tilda and I stood frozen in the barn's shadow, not speaking, not daring to call her back. I had tears in my throat, but I couldn't let them fall. This wasn't the kind of goodbye that let you cry. It was the kind that asked you to be brave in silence. And then halfway down the field, just before the curve of the creek dipped her from view, we saw her stop. A flutter, a soft shuffle, and then Penny appeared. Broken wing, wobbling gait, feathers dulled by days of weather, but alive. She waddled toward Nell without hesitation, letting out a soft, warbled sound that cut through the dark like a beacon. Nell turned, nose to the ground, and pressed her head gently against the duck's side. They stood there like that, no fireworks, no miracles, just reunion, quiet, fierce, whole. I didn't follow. I couldn't. It wasn't mine to walk anymore. And as they disappeared into the tall grass, something loosened inside me, something I hadn't let go of in years. The barn feels different now. Not empty, exactly, just quieter in a way that settles deep. Dusty still guards the door at night, but with less urgency, like he knows the storm has passed. Maple stays close to me, her fear replaced by something gentler, something more curious. Sometimes she noses the gate and looks out into the field, and I wonder if she remembers, if she's waiting too. We never saw Nell and Penny again. I'd like to believe they made it, that Penny led her somewhere safe, that Nell found a place in the world beyond fences and barns. But maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the point wasn't where they ended up, but that we let them go, that we trusted love, even when it looked nothing like we expected. I still sit by the creek sometimes, listening for that odd little quack that used to echo at dusk. I haven't heard it in weeks. But I swear, on some mornings when the mist hangs low and the fields are still, I feel something move just out of sight. And I smile. Not everything broken needs fixing. Not every rescue ends in cages or clinics. Sometimes rescue means stepping back and believing in the bond that no one else understands. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you feel, wonder, or pause, share it. Let others walk this path with us. Subscribe, leave a comment, and let's keep telling the stories that don't fit into neat little boxes. Because sometimes the ones who lead us home walk on four legs or waddle.